Good morning. Whether you are here in the sanctuary with us or you're watching from at home or in our library, it's wonderful for all of us to be together on this chilly morning. So as we settle in together on this Sunday before Martin Luther King Jr. Day and a troubling presidential inauguration, let us pause for a moment to center our minds and our hearts for worship. We begin with Kathleen Roslin's prayer for Martin Luther King Jr. Sunday. And please join me in the spirit of meditation or prayer. Spirit of justice, God who befriends those who stand upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone, we are grateful to be together this morning. We gather especially to remember Martin Luther King Jr., but not only him, for there are thousands of unnamed women and men who put their bodies and lives on the line so that all may be free. And yet freedom comes at a cost, and we know that racism and homophobia, ageism and ableism, sexism and classism, all of these often unacknowledged realities prevent us from fully knowing one another, from creating the beloved community spoken of by prophets and ordinary persons alike. May the work of Dr. King continue to eradicate injustice wherever and whenever we encounter it. May we continue to speak out against injustice, to speak even if we are afraid our words will not be heard or welcomed. May the spirit of Dr. King continue to flow through our daily living. May we have the courage of Dr. King as we continue to stand up for justice, reconciliation, and truth, despite challenge and controversy. Dr. King went to the mountaintop. He saw the promised land, and he reassured us that we will get there one day. May that be no paradisal dream, but a reality in our own time. May it be so. Amen. And come, my friends, and let's worship together.
It is time to light our chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith tradition. Can I have a volunteer come up and light the... Yes, wonderful. Thank you. Reverend Sasha can help you, or Nick. Please stand now as you're able for the lighting of our chalice. The words I share today are by Anastasie by Roche. We kindle this chalice not only because it originated in antiquity, but because this symbol combats malice. This burning flame represented hope. During the bleakness of World War II, a sign of refuge, meaning death was circumvented, if only for that night. This emblem of faith in a chalice encircled twice assured weary refugees fleeing Nazi persecution that for a time they had found safety and respite. Today, this beacon shining bright reminds us to summon the strength to extend care and love to those in need forthright. We ignite this flame today for our shared humanity. And now together we'll read our affirmation by James Philip Blake. It's on our screen, and we're going to try it a little different today. Here's how we'll do it. I'll read the first part, and then we'll repeat back. Love is the spirit of this fellowship.
Love is the spirit of this fellowship.
And service is its law.
And service is its law.
This is our great covenant.
This is our great covenant.
To dwell together in peace.
Dwell together in peace.
To seek the truth in love.
To seek the truth in love.
And to help one another.
And to help one another.
We'll remain standing for our opening hymn. It's number 1018 in your blue hymnal, but it's also on the screen. So let us sing together.
With me
Do you want to go back? Good morning. I'm Susie Harris, your worship associate for this today. Welcome to the Morristown Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. We're delighted to have you here, especially on this day that we thought we'd have so much snow. It's wonderful to see so many people here. If you're new here or returning, please let us know who you are by filling out a newcomer card. We'd love to know more about you and connect with you. You can see a welcome ambassador. They are wearing a gold sash. She's very friendly back there. You can say hi to her. If you need a caring presence or a listening ear, you can ask someone with a blue sash. Over here, Paul's got his blue sash. And you can have a word in a library together, connect. We're a community of many ages, but we all worship together, and you can join us on many Sundays, online here, in the sanctuary, in the library, out the door. If you need a place to have a more in-depth conversation during the service, or if you have a little one who's wiggly, you can go to the library. It's live streamed there. There are a lot of exciting things happening, but fewer today because we've canceled or postponed the volunteer fair, and also the Creative Matters session. We'll just postpone them until next week. We will have coffee hour after service, so let us join together there. And we also have an opportunity, a separate thing, an opportunity to share your thoughts with our first open question. We're doing these sessions where we listen to you and hear what makes our fellowship welcoming. That's our first question. What does it mean to be welcoming? So our next offering is next Tuesday, the 28th, from 7 to 8 on Zoom. So you can do it remotely. We'd love to hear from you and join this community of conversation. Next week, we're going to have a fun activity. We're going to be ice skating at the Men in Sports Arena Sunday from 3 to 5 with Nick. You can bring your own skates. You can rent them there and learn more online or in our newsletter. So you can always look us up on muuf.org, and we're glad you're here.
Yep. All right, I have a story. I got a couple little ones. You guys want to come tell a story with me? Olivia? Grace? You want to come up here? Or should I stand up here and tell it? You tell me what to do today. We're winging it. All right, I'm going to stand up here and tell you guys I'm just going to tell the story. You stay there. That's fine. I'm not going to make you do anything you don't want to do. I'm going to stand, and we also have the slides up here, hopefully. I gave them to Alex last minute, but they're there, so we got them. This is the story of Frederick. All Along the Meadow by Leo Liani. Got the credit the author there. All along the meadow there were cows, where cows grazed and horses ran. There was an old stone wall. And in that wall, not far from the barn, was the granary. And a chatty family of field mice had their home there. But the farmers had moved away, the barn was abandoned, and the granary stood open. And since winter was not far off, the little mice began to gather corn and nuts and wheat and straw. And they all worked day and night, all except Frederick. Frederick, why don't you work? They asked. I do work, said Frederick. I gather the sun's rays for the cold, dark winter days. And when they saw Frederick sitting there, staring at the meadow, they said, And now, Frederick? Well, I gather colors, answered Frederick, for the winter is gray. And once Frederick seemed half asleep. Are you dreaming, Frederick? They asked reproachfully. But Frederick said, Oh no, I'm gathering words. For winter days are long and many, and we'll run out of things to say. And the winter days came, and then the first snow fell, and the 5 little field mice took to their hideout in the stones. In the beginning, there was lots to eat, and the mice told stories of foolish foxes and silly cats, and they were a happy family. Right? Beginning of summer or winter, we all have fun. It's Christmas time, whatever. But little by little, they had nibbled up most of the nuts and berries, and the straw was gone, and the corn was only a memory. And it was cold in the wall, and no one felt like chatting. It's kind of like the middle of January. They remembered what Frederick had said about sun rays and colors and words. And what about your supplies, Frederick? They asked. Close your eyes, said Frederick. Now is his time to shine. And he climbed up on a big stone. Now I send you the rays of the sun. Do you feel their golden glow? And as Frederick spoke of the sun, the four little mice began to feel warmer. Was it Frederick's voice? Was it magic? And how about colors, Frederick? They asked anxiously. Well, close your eyes again. And when we hold them, and then he told them of blue periwinkles and red poppies and yellow wheat and the green leaves of the berry bush. And they saw the colors as clearly as if they had been painted in their minds. And the words, Frederick? Frederick cleared his throat and waited a moment, and then, as if from a stage, he said, "Who scatters the snowflakes, who melts the ice, who spoils the weather, who makes it nice, who grows the four-leaf clovers in June, who dims the daylight and who lights the moon. Four little field mice who live in the sky, four little field mice like you and I. One is the spring mouse who turns on the showers. Then comes the summer who paints in the flowers. The fall mouse is next with walnuts and wheat, and winter is last with cold little feet. Aren't we lucky the seasons are four? Think of the years with one less or one more." And when Frederick had finished, they all applauded. "But Frederick," they said, "you're a poet." And Frederick blushed and took a bow and said sweetly, "I know it." Yeah. What's that? Oh, do I have the... Sorry, I don't have... Sorry.
Now it's time for our milestones and passages. So sometimes we come to this place and we are carrying a whole lot on our hearts. Perhaps you got married, maybe you lost a job, or you recovered from an illness, or maybe you went through a divorce. And whatever your joy, sorrow, or concern, you can share it during our service by filling out our milestones and passages form before 9 a.m. on Sunday morning. And you can also fill out the form both by going online onto our website as well as by filling out one of our paper forms, which you can grab on your way through our doors. We have quite a few milestones and passages to share today, and so I ask you to please respond after each of these. We hold you in our hearts. This morning, we join communities of faith around the world in joy after the announcement of a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. May the 6-week pause of violence lead to a more lasting peace. We hold you in our hearts. Beverly and George Hayes share the joy that they are celebrating their 54th wedding anniversary today. Congratulations, you two, and may you have many more happy years together. We hold you in our hearts. Bob Calafiore shares the sorrow that he is suffering from severe lung problems that limit him from most activities, including coming to MUUF. He welcomes emails, phone calls after 10 p.m., or 10 a.m., sorry, not 10. Don't do that to him. Or even occasional prearranged visits at home. We hold you in our hearts. Michael Hacker shares the sorrow that Judy Harris has COVID and was transferred from Morris View Rehab Center to Morristown Medical Center on Friday. We hold you in our hearts. Carolyn Blanchard shares the concern that her mother, Annalie Blanchard, fell last week and has possibly broken her wrist. She's been recovering at home and will be in a splint for a few weeks. We hold you in our hearts. Diana Hart shares a gratitude for our UU Faith Action New Jersey volunteers. She says that they were planning a reproductive justice gala on February 8th here in Shoe Hall, right across the way. However, these hardworking, amazing advocates have too much on their plates to create an event to support this good work. So let us support them if you can financially. Even though the event is canceled, you can still buy tickets, which will go to support UU Faith Action New Jersey's reproductive justice work. Diana shares that she would also like to acknowledge Sarah, who will be representing Girls for Days at our volunteer fair. She says, I met her 3 years ago, and her whole life is about doing good in the world. Thank you, Sarah. We hold you in our hearts. Let's go ahead now and take a time for the prayers and meditations that you hold within your own hearts. Go ahead and close your eyes. Get comfy in your chair. Breathe. Hear the breaths of the people around you, this community that is holding you. Feel the spirit of life holding us all in this still moment together. Let's go ahead now and take 3 deep, belly deep breaths together and then a moment of silence. Amen, and blessed be. Now let's go ahead and please remain seated as we sing number 1055. It's in your blue hymnal, How Sweet the Darkness.
Our reading this morning is by the disability rights activist, writer, and poet, Laura Hershey. It's called Telling. What you risk telling your story. You will bore them. Your voice will break. Your ink stain and spill and stain your coat. No one will understand. Their eyes become fences. You will park yourself forever on the outside. Your differences once and for all revealed, dangerous. The names you give to yourself will be epitaphs. Your happiness will be called bravery, denial. Your sadness will justify their pity, your fear will magnify their fears, and everything you say will prove something about their God or their economic system. Your feelings that change day to day, kaleidoscopic, will freeze in place, brand you forever, justify anything they decide to do with you. Those with power can afford to tell their story or not. Those without power risk everything to tell their story and must. Someone somewhere will hear your story and decide to fight, to live and refuse compromise. Someone else will tell her own story, risking everything. We now come to the time in our service where we offer our financial support to the congregation. Our choir will sing for us, and your donations make all that we do here together possible, and also make our wider community a better place, because we share half our donations with an organization that does good in the world. Today, we're splitting the offering with Interfaith Food Pantry, who provide food and access to food to Morris County residents. You can give in the plate or by following the instructions in your order of service or shown on the screen. Thank you in advance for your support.
Muslim, a Jew, a heretic convict.
Thank you, choir. Tomorrow, our country will inaugurate a new presidential administration, an administration that troubles many people. Some people will tune into the inauguration proceedings, whether in celebration or in a sort of grim fascination. But many others plan to instead turn our attention in a different direction, toward the legacy of a different man, a man who dreamed of a more loving and just nation. That man is, of course, the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now, when I grew up at the Valley Unitarian Universalist congregation in Arizona, I managed to go years and years thinking that Reverend Dr. King was not only a Unitarian Universalist, but some kind of UU saint, because he was mentioned so often, honored so often in my congregation. And while Martin Luther King Jr. was not a Unitarian Universalist, many UUs joined with him in the struggle for civil rights back in the 50s and 60s. And his teachings about racial justice, nonviolent resistance, and collective liberation were spoken of often and highly in my home congregation and in many other Unitarian Universalist congregations. And perhaps it's been the same with this congregation here. One does not have to be a Unitarian Universalist to be a UU saint. As we reflect on King's legacy and his call for justice, it's important to remember that his work was part of a much larger story of resistance and resilience in the face of oppression, and that story was inspired by countless other stories. King's story drew on earlier stories and inspired future stories, true stories of struggles against injustice. And this larger story of resilience and resistance in our country goes back before the founding of our nation to European settlers' enslavement of Africans and Native Americans in the colonies and enslaved people's survival strategies. The story continued through almost 400 years of captivity on this soil as enslaved people suffered, endured, escaped, fought back, and were eventually given their long overdue freedom. That story of resilience and resistance continued through the violence and degradation of the Jim Crow era and the struggles and hard-won victories of countless justice workers like King during the Civil Rights Movement. And it continues even now as people join in solidarity today against racism, poverty, the war of attrition against immigrants, the oppression of transgender people, and so many other affronts to human and civil rights that we face in our communities in our modern world. Where there is oppression, you will always find stories of resistance and resilience. And through this larger story of injustice and struggle, countless smaller stories played a powerful role in helping oppressed people find resilience, resistance, and renewal. We're going to explore some of those stories today. When people were enslaved in the United States, it must have been incredibly hard for them to hold on to any hope that they would ever be free. From the time European settlers began enslaving people in the early 1500s until the abolition of slavery in 1865, countless individuals endured suffering that is hard to even really wrap our minds around today. And for many enslaved people, the most that they could hope for was that the slavers who held them captive would not be too violent and might let them stay with their families. Often life was much harder than that, and people suffered deeply. And when people are subjected to such conditions, even if their bodies manage to survive, their spirits can be deeply wounded, and sometimes their spirits can even be broken. So how did people manage to get through such painful times that lasted for such a long time in our history? One thing that they did was tell stories that helped their spirits recover when wounded and remain strong through years and years of hardship. Many of those stories came from the Bible. And that is an interesting story in and of itself. You see, the Bible was originally given to enslaved people by their captors. It wasn't a kindness. The slaveholders tried to use Christianity to force people to obey and to remain submissive. But it didn't always work, because once a story is told, it has its own kind of power. There is something special that can happen to a story when it enters our minds and our hearts. And the slaveholders may have controlled what stories were told, but that did not stop people from interpreting those stories in ways that were very different than their captors intended. When the stories entered their hearts and minds, enslaved African Americans often found new messages in those ancient stories, empowering messages that helped them face times of pain with their spirits intact. Instead of absorbing messages that made them feel helpless and that encouraged their obedience, they found stories that offered them hope. For example, when they heard stories about heaven, they found comfort. They believed that no matter how hard their lives here on earth were, there was something good waiting for them in the next life. And they also believed that justice would eventually come to them, that God would hold their captors accountable, if not in this life, then in the next. And these stories helped them keep their spirits from breaking, even during those most painful times. And other stories gave them hope for what might be possible in this world instead of the next. For instance, they heard in the story in Galatians about how in the early church there was neither slave nor free, for you were all children of God. And that story reminded them that even though they were treated like their lives didn't matter, they mattered to God. They had worth and dignity. Their captors may not have treated them that way, but the story reassured them that they were every bit as much children of God as their captors were. And more, it offered them hope that one day there might truly be no difference between enslaved people and free people, because all people would be free. And that kind of hope could strengthen their spirits even when freedom seemed impossibly far away. Stories from the Bible continue to offer people resilience in the face of injustice hundreds of years later as well. In his final speech, Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't really matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop." And King was referring to the story of Moses in the Bible and drawing strength and reassurance from that story. In the ancient story, Moses led the Hebrews out of slavery in Egypt to the Promised Land, a place where they could finally be free. As they neared the Promised Land, Moses learned that he would not reach it with everyone else. He found out that he would die before he got there, just like King knew he might die before African Americans won their civil liberties. And then, as the old story goes, Moses went up to Mount Nebo, and God showed him the whole land. God said to him, "This is the land of which I swore to your ancestors, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your own eyes." And that's why when Martin Luther King Jr. referenced this old story in his final speech, he said, "I've been to the mountaintop, and I've looked over, and I've seen the Promised Land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the Promised Land." So stories have a powerful effect on our hearts and minds. Last week we talked about how sharing our personal stories can help to connect us with one another more deeply. Our personal stories are powerful enough to build bridges between our hearts. But other kinds of stories can touch our hearts too. Stories about others' resilience in the face of hardships can help us to find resilience in the face of our own challenges. And throughout our history here in this country, stories have helped oppressed people not only withstand injustice, but fight back against it. And we'll explore that topic in a second, that second topic here in a moment. But first, let's go ahead and pause briefly like we do here and sing together before continuing today's sermon. Let's go ahead and remain seated for this one. And we're going to sing just the first verse of hymn number 103 in your gray hymnal, For All the Saints. Stories help us to withstand the storms that we face, like trees can bend in strong winds instead of snap. But stories don't just help us to stay strong when life threatens to break us. They also help us to push back. There are 3 interconnected stories I love that help people resist injustice today. And the first is another story from the Bible, this time from Christian scripture. And in the story, Jesus was disheartened. He had been working hard to liberate his people from Roman occupation in mind and spirit, if not in body. And like Martin Luther King Jr. in our earlier story, he knew that he might not live to see his mission succeed. In fact, he knew that he might die soon. So feeling sorrowful and troubled, Jesus went to the Mount of Olives to pray. He was looking for resilience, for strength in the face of adversity and the will to carry on. As the story goes, he prayed, saying, "Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done." And there appeared an angel unto him from heaven, strengthening him. The story goes. And then Jesus was able to carry on his mission to keep working to free his people from Roman occupation in body, mind, and spirit, even though it eventually led to his arrest. And he was able to continue to do it nonviolently. And as the men gathered to arrest him, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. But Jesus urged his followers not to use violence, even for him. "Put your sword back in its place," he said, "for those who draw the sword will die by the sword." He wanted them to struggle for freedom nonviolently, turning the other cheek and loving their enemies, even as they resisted injustice and sought to create a better world. And around 1900 years later, Jesus' story inspired another great man, and that man was Mahatma Gandhi. And like Jesus, Gandhi was working for a better world, and like Jesus, his efforts were failing. The year was 1949, and tensions between Hindus and Muslims in India were high. And Gandhi's personal study of the great world religions had led him to believe that there was beauty, truth, and wisdom in all religions. So even though Hindus and Muslims were in conflict with one another within his country, Gandhi believed that they ought to coexist as one nation. And he worked really hard for that vision. But as efforts failed, tensions grew so explosive that the decision was made to partition India into 2 countries, India and Pakistan. And Gandhi was devastated, but as someone who had studied the great religions of the world, he knew countless stories that he could draw on for spiritual strength in that moment. And one story he turned to was the story of Jesus at Mount Olives that we just heard. Like Jesus in his own time of sorrow, Gandhi decided to take some time to fast and to pray. And like Jesus, he found the will to carry on. Gandhi wrote, I invoke the aid of the all-embracing power to take me away from this vale of tears rather than make me a helpless witness to the butchery by man become savage, whether he dares to call himself a Muslim or a Hindu or whatnot. Then he quoted Jesus at the Mount of Olives, saying, "Yet I cry, not my will but thine alone shall prevail. If he wants me, he will keep me here on this earth yet a while." The story of Jesus finding strength at Mount Olives was not the only story from the Bible that inspired Gandhi. He also found Jesus' teachings about nonviolence instructive in his own nonviolent struggle against an occupation of his own time. Gandhi wanted to help liberate India from the British, just like Jesus wanted to liberate Israel from the Romans. And Gandhi was deeply inspired by the stories of Jesus' nonviolent approach to that work. He wrote, "Jesus was the most active resistor known perhaps to history. His was nonviolence par excellence." Gandhi believed that nonviolent resistance was the most ethical way to fight for freedom. And drawing on Jesus' example, he led a successful nonviolent movement that led to India's independence. And we will continue in a moment onto our third story of these three interwoven tales. But first, let's go ahead and pause now and take some time to stretch our bodies by rising as we are able. We're going to sing the second verse of our hymn. Again, number 103, For All the Saints. Now let's go ahead and wrap up our sermon with the third of our set of interlocking stories of resistance. A little while ago, we heard the story of Gandhi, and now Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. were contemporaries. When Gandhi won his struggle for independence, King was just finishing up college at the age of 19 because he started at 15 years old, and he was preparing to enter theological school to become a minister. King knew of Gandhi's work. And in theological school, he studied Gandhi and was inspired by stories of his successes with nonviolent resistance. King described Gandhi as one of the individuals who greatly reveal the working of the Spirit of God. 9 years later, King had become the honorary president of the Gandhi Society for Human Rights, and he went on to study nonviolence in India. In 1959, he said, "I am more convinced than ever before that the method of nonviolent resistance is the most potent weapon available to oppressed people in their struggle for justice and human dignity." Although King died before he could see all of the fruits of his labor, the nonviolent movement for civil rights that he led in this country led to many successes and inspired activists for years to come. I heard these three interlocking stories of Jesus's, Gandhi's, and King's nonviolent resistance against oppression in a class on Kingian nonviolence several years ago. I was studying alongside other activists who were involved in Arizona's migrant justice movement. And so you see these stories continue to be told today and continue to inspire people today to resist injustice. And that is part of their power. They teach us how to fight oppression effectively, as well as how to weather occasional failures without giving up. My friends, tomorrow our country is inaugurating a new presidential administration. Many communities will be under attack in the coming weeks, months, and years, starting with immigrant beloveds who will likely face raids this week. We need to be prepared to protect one another. May we remember the stories that can help us find resistance and resilience in times of hardship. May we share the stories that help move us to action, and may we all be a part of the story that people will one day tell of this time. A story in which, when injustice revealed its ugly head, together the people resisted. Amen. Blessed be. May it be so. Now let's go ahead and rise and body your spirit one more time. We're going to sing those last two verses of our hymn, again, 103, For All the Saints. Please be seated. It's time now for us to bring our time of worship to a close. As we prepare to go out into our daily lives, I leave you with the words of Maddie Sinfanus. We extinguish this flame, but we keep its light in our hearts with its message of love and justice, taking it outside these walls to the world we live in until we are together again. Amen. Blessed be, and go in peace.